Kwame played a nurse in Casualty for 5 years, wrote plays for the National Theatre, including Elmina's Kitchen and Fix Up. He's presented television programmes, and since 2011 he's been running Centre Stage Theatre in Baltimore. Recently, Kwame was announced as the next artistic director of the Young Vic in London. Before he starts in February, he's already in the UK directing The Lady from the Sea, adapted from the Ibsen original by young playwright Elinor. It stars Keri-Armah Bird as Elida, the protagonist who struggles to assert her freedom and identity after becoming the second wife of the rather uptight Dr. Wangel. But this version of the Scandi angst drama shifts the action from 19th century Norway to the Caribbean of the 1950s. When I met Elinor and Kwame, I asked the director why the shift of time and place.
Norway had Caribbean colonies in 1888 when he was writing this. St. John's, St. Croix, Ibsen would have known that was part of the Garden of Europe. And it felt really natural.
Yeah, so what was the mission as far as you were concerned, Elinor, when Kwame said, I want this taken from... In fact, did he specify? Did he say 1950s Caribbean setting?
In terms of what this play is interrogating, we thought that transposing it back to the 50s, the early 50s, would be the most exciting time for us to set it.
Is that something to do with the sexual politics? The idea that Elida is still having to ask for permission almost to exert her idea of identity, of freedom from her husband? Would that be too problematic if it was set today?
If we set it now, then it would almost feel as if that wrestle that Elida is having is happening too late. But if the minute we set it in the 50s, she becomes this kind of maverick, this revolutionary. She's really shaking at the bars of the cage.
From the moment I put this ring on my finger, I felt as if you'd bought me.
Bought you?
I sold myself to you. I'm not blaming you. It was a transaction we made together. I became property, chattel.
I have never in any way thought of you as my property.
It's not just you, it's everyone. The island, the whole world.
Oh, so love plays no part in it? None at all?
Love doesn't need this.
What are you doing?
Will you take your ring off too?
No, I won't.
Please, Van Gogh.
Of course I won't. I can't.
If you let me go,
no,
then we can both be free.
I don't want to be free.
I need to have my full freedom. Do you understand?
Now, having Keri-Armah Bird playing Elida, that adds something different to it as well. And it raises the whole question of how the casting process works. Because this is not about colour-blind casting. This is casting which adds a different twist to the idea of her being an outsider, because this is an interracial marriage now.
Yes, and one of our first conversations was about, we won't do colourblind casting. Let's be specific about this. It's not about race, but it does add an element to it. And so, for instance, there's a whole sequence when she talks about, and it's from Ibsen and from Cook, when she speaks about, the moment that I put this ring on my finger, I felt that I was bought. Now, of course, set in the Caribbean in 1951 in an interracial marriage, that has a completely different connotation to when it was just two Norwegians, for instance. And I found it very interesting to investigate that. Again, not to foreground it, but to kind of put it in the mix.
And Elinor, you can't drift too far away from Ibsen, and he was at times drawing on the idea of Norse myths and the lady from the sea herself, Elida, whether she is almost like a Selkie-like figure. Now, transplanting the play to the Caribbean, you're drawing on different kind of myths in that case, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the things when I first read the play that really excited me and caught my imagination. I love the fact that it's this kind of folk tale, this allegory. That's something that's really close to my heart in terms of the kind of stories that I'm interested in. And then when I was working on the drafts, I was doing some digging into Caribbean myths, and I've got a reference to a goddess who lives at the bottom of the lagoon, which is the lagoon that Elida is swimming in. And so, we talked a little bit in rehearsals about how so many cultures have their kind of version of the mermaid. And I think it's something that speaks to everywhere, all over the world.
In the Caribbean, we would call voodoo, the equivalent of voodoo or vodun, we would call that obia, right? And so there's a ceremony that the stranger and Elida do, and that we speak about in the play, where they kind of take their rings, they sew them together and then throw them into the sea. And that would be like a process. I could access it through Caribbean obia, not that I do it, but I could access it through knowledge of that world. And so you actually get the kind of expat husband kind of going, what is that? What does that really mean? And her taking it really seriously. So it roots it culturally as well.
Freely given promise is just as valid as this, it's more so.
Well, that strange ceremony where you threw your rings into the sea, that can't compete with this.
That was real, that was pure.
That wasn't a marriage.
We made a vow to one another.
You made a vow to me, a real one.
So let me go back on it.
I don't have anything to prove in a way of kind of going,